Hello and Happy New Year. Is it still okay to say that? And welcome back to another episode of your favorite tech and innovation series, Tech Innovation Talks. I'm Fabricio Astua, tasked with hosting short, sharp, and informative conversations on the most on-point tech topics. In our first episode, we covered business transformation. In our second, we looked at retail trends, highlighting some of the creative ways the industry is changing. And those episodes are still available via all your favorite providers, including YouTube, Spotify, and Apple and Google Podcasts. So if you haven't already done so, please do take a look. But this week, it's time to focus on what we do best as we talk innovation, but with a slight twist as we're looking to focus on the growing emergence of food technology. And with just that in mind, we've brought in a couple of heavyweights. First up, I'm excited to welcome Danone's Director of Research and Innovation, Mr. Luke Chavez. Luke has a bunch of experience in leading product development projects in the US, where I believe you currently have the rather delicious sounding title of leading Danone's coffee creaming RI activities. Greetings, Luke. Welcome to our show. Tell me, is your role as glamorous as it sounds?
Well, thanks for having me on, and it is about as glamorous as it sounds. I basically get paid to drink coffee all day, which I think would be a lot of people's dreams.
Our second guest today is a bit of a home favorite, with over 20 years of experience in coming up with innovative strategies for our clients. Please welcome Mr. MJV, Global Innovation Director, Fabricio Astua.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for inviting me over to be part of this. First time here. So hi to you, hi to Luke. I'm enthusiastic to have a great conversation today. So let's do it.
More importantly, Fabricio, are you a coffee enthusiast yourself?
Well, that's the thing. I'm a Brazilian who doesn't drink coffee. Can you believe that? But I know there's a lot of things going on around coffee. So I'm fascinated by the whole coffee world and the whole thing around it, such as as you have it with wine, you have it with coffee, and you have it with other things. It's a very fascinating world. So I'm looking forward to what we're going to discuss here today.
Perfect. Okay, so let's get things rolling. We have just arrived in 2022. So maybe we can start things off by looking at some of the new innovation trends that will be coming our way this year. Luke, from a food perspective and food tech in general, what should we be looking out for? Are synthetic foods going to play a bigger role? Where is coffee headed? Will smart foods be more prominent? Lots of questions, one man to answer them. Luke, what can you share with us?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's $1 million question, I think you'd say. There's a few macro trends that I think I've got my eye on, my team has their eye on, and a couple of them to call out. The continued evolution of plant-based and how you can make new plant-based ingredients or manipulate those plant-based ingredients to, say, mimic their dairy or their meat counterparts. I think you've seen, with the rise of Impossible and the Impossible Burger and meat analogs, every other category is looking at how can we, crack against those big boys, the dairy giants, the meat giants. And really, how can you manipulate plant-based ingredients via technology, fermentation science, enzyme modification? There's a lot of, really cool spaces really on the front edge of technology that are coming down the pipe. And so, molecular, cellular, making dairy proteins that actually don't actually have a cow. So they're coming from, say, yeast or some sort of other microbiological vessel. Those are things that we've got our eyes on. And really, how do you scale that up and how do you bring that to the masses in a way that's profitable and also, doesn't cost the consumer too much? Or those are really the big things that we've got our eyes on for 2022.
Well, it sounds very exciting. Fabricio, from a more general perspective, what can we look out for? What can we look forward to this year from an innovation perspective?
Well, I think that's also a very interesting question. When I think about, from a general perspective, I like to have, a macro to micro sort of approach. I think it's important that we, when we're talking about these trends, whatever trends, it's also very important to look at, the bigger picture so that we understand the overall context in which things are happening and the world is evolving. So these macro trends, these drivers of change, as some call it, they intersect between them, and they enable for multiple combinations, multiple scenarios that will play differently. So I think that, for instance, even we have talked exhaustively about this specific topic, but for instance, digital transformation is far from over. So we can see that, for instance, with the buzz around and interest around metaverse or metaverses, or not to mention the importance of data. So I think the fact is that these changes are still in motion, and we are in a decade of big transition. So on the other hand, I think the human being is always a trend, whether we are talking about Generation Z, or about a large chunk of us that is aging, or all the implications that come with this. So this will bring us new values, new truths. Finally, there's also the whole climate change things, challenges that we are facing. So regardless of the trend, these factors will impact the way society works, what do we consume, how do we consume, and at the end, how do we do business. So if we're talking about food tech, which is something that is not my specialty, but I like to read a little bit about, I am very curious about to see how I've read a lot about the clean label movement, and it's challenging. So how do you source ingredients to clean products? How do you keep products' main characteristics, and ultimately, how do you communicate this? Or another thing that I think is very interesting is affordable nutrition. So the challenges that come with this are huge for governments, for policymakers, and businesses. So and all of this within this context that I mentioned. So what does that mean? I think that's the things we need to keep in mind.
Fantastic. Luke, I don't know if you wanted to comment on any of the topics that Fabricio brought up there before I move on to my next question.
Yeah, of course. I think, there's a couple of things that he touched on that kind of intersect with each other. He talked about the climate change and that being a very large macro trend. And so how does that kind of affect into the food space? And I think that touches into, some of that plant-based lifestyle and the emergence of plant-based, and, the reduction on, the land that's needed to, for cattle, or the resources that need to go into that. And then he touched on a really good point of, clean label versus some of these new technologies sort of thing. I always think there's a little bit of a dichotomy and almost a split at this point of, you've got certain products that are using a lot of future food technology to try and, like I say, mimic as much of their dairy or their meat counterparts. But how do you do that can be in a really, technical, maybe the ingredient list likes to get really long at that sort of point. And I think there's a consumer that's really into that. But on the true plant-based evangelists that have been around since, Silk is one of our brands at Danone. We've been doing plant-based milks and soy milk for decades. I think you've got a whole other segment that's kind of swinging the other way. And that's where that super clean label that Fabricio mentioned is also super critical. And there's a big space there. And that's where it's a little bit of a different, technology solve of what you're trying to do. You're trying to keep, the base ingredients themselves, say a soybean or a pea or a pulse, and what kind of modifications can you do, in that clean label space? How can you do less modification to those base ingredients while still providing a user experience that they're going to want to continue to come back to? Those are the big questions that we're trying to unlock every day. And, it's a race to see who can do those better, because that's who's going to win in the marketplace eventually.
Fantastic. Luke, can you kind of take us a little bit into the coffee world now? I'm thinking specifically, as you kind of are working in that specific market, as you do for coffee house culture businesses, I can imagine that sometimes it can be quite hard to make sure ideas and processes don't lose the kind of the goal, and they don't lose out on making sure that they're profitable and focused. Can you take us kind of into that world and explain how you ensure that your ideas remain practical and solutions which are genuinely going to work for your company?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, a big key piece is, there's a lot of future food tech and technology that's being developed right now, but how do you do that at scale, and how do you do it in a profitable manner? Questions that you got to start at the very beginning. And, really what we sit down with from a research group, we're going to sit down with our brand marketing counterparts. We're going to sit down with our finance counterparts and say, in looking at the marketplace and the competitive landscape and what other products that we have out on the market, what is a reasonable price that we can charge without turning off consumers or premium, putting yourself in a premium tier, which doesn't, fit with the brand story that we have, and really getting clear on what are those guardrails. And so that, when we're going down and we're doing our recipe development and we're selecting which ingredients we want to put in, keeping an eye on how that affects the final bottom line throughout the continued process. And, then a second piece that we're always looking at is, we're really connected with our procurement counterparts and making sure that, we're talking to all the suppliers that we possibly can throughout the globe to make sure that we're, one, getting the highest quality ingredients that we possibly can, because that's going to allow us to make, consistent quality product over and over again. But then also we're getting the best price for it as we continue to build. And, when it then comes down to the bench top and you're in the kitchen, you're in the lab and you're kind of whipping up your recipes, there's a bit of a North Star development that we like to approach, that we like to take. And what does that mean is, let's go make the best product that we possibly can. Not thinking about what the price is, not thinking about, what's going to ultimately be the end use, because we want to make sure that we're delivering to the consumer. And then once you've got that product, then you can start to say, all right, from a food technology sort of standpoint, is there ways that we can do this at a more effective cost? Is there another ingredient that we can sub in? And that's where the science of the food science really comes in. We can all make great products that might be the most expensive thing on the world, but translating that to something that we can, again, do at scale and we can continue to do in a consistent manner. That's the big key of being a big, successful brand.
If we look at it from let's say our perspective as consultants and those that are trying to crack this problem from outside and from our own experience, I think it's about balancing. Well, first of all, having this connection with the consumer, with what he wants, what is he feeling, to really understand what is the journey that is bringing him to consume maybe coffee or something else, for instance. But we cannot forget that together with this connection and this understanding of the consumer or the end user, there are other variables that need to be taken into account so that we remain practical. So those are, well, first of all, what is the value to the business that we are talking about? So how does this translate into something for the business in terms of growth or in terms of market share or first moving advantage or differentiation? And you can go on forever on those things. And finally, the third aspect, which is the technical viability of whatever it is that we are talking about. So I think that relates a little bit with what Luke was saying when he said that he's always talking to his suppliers to really try to see what is doable, what can you do within this aspect of, okay, this is what my consumer wants, this is what is good for my business. Now, can I do it technically? So I think that the balance between those and the intersection of these three, and now I think there's even a fourth one, which is something we were talking about first, which is the sustainability aspect. So when you mix those four things, there's like a sweet spot there in the middle. That's I think where the big innovations are coming, or the more simple, thus sometimes more difficult things are coming out. So I think it's a little bit of that.
So Luke, I think you kind of talked about this a little bit in your introduction, but something I'm very keen to hear you talk about, and I think our audience will enjoy as well, is kind of thinking about the competition and these smaller companies that are emerging, and how they can kind of have that niche, or they can focus on something from a very strategic perspective. How can you ensure that you're competing with them? How do you deal with these kind of smaller companies which are coming in and really focusing on, say, an individual aspect of coffee making?
Oh yeah, the coffee space is exploding, over the last 5, even going back 10 years, specialty coffee with the rise of, the coffee shop on the corner that's doing different roasts and different origins. There's a lot of innovation in that space. And so a lot of small competitors definitely nipping at the heels. And, we've got a lot of deep data, a lot of consumer insights that we're using to develop our innovation strategy. And competitive pressures and looking at the little guys is also, it's a key piece of inspiration building is what our team likes to do. So we're always at least once a week in the kitchen. We're bringing in any products that we're kind of seeing, no matter how small. We're going to the natural, we're going to the local grocers, and we're picking up products. And really what we're doing, again, is, like I said, we're trying to build some inspiration from them, not necessarily totally change our innovation strategy or pivot, because, that's just going to cause spinning wheels, lost resources, those sorts of things. But, really what we're looking for is, what kind of ingredients are they trying to hero? What's kind of storytelling are they coming from? Is there a nugget of insight that maybe it's something that we've missed, or is it a part of our larger innovation strategy that we might need to, add on or kind of twist just a little bit? We've seen some competitive products that have come out that, we get it in and we look at it and we say, I think there's something here. They didn't necessarily execute on it as well as we probably think that we could. And maybe there's a bit of a twist that we think that they missed on that. So we can say it's a yes and sort of thing and continue to build on that. And then make even a better product and a better concept overall. So really, we're using those little guys as inspiration as we continue to build out a more robust innovation pipeline as we're looking down 2023, 2024. We got to keep our eyes, multiple years ahead to make sure that we kind of stay as the number one player.
Can you reflect on maybe, and obviously I don't want you to go into too much detail on this, but can you reflect on maybe some mistakes that you've seen happen with regards to reacting too viciously or too violently to this kind of competition within the market?
Yeah, I think, especially as you kind of look at how supply chain issues have arose, due to the COVID pandemic and all those sorts of things. There was a moment in time where it was, hey, in the coffee creaming sort of space, new flavors, new innovations, like let's keep, putting things out there so we can bring new news to the category. But what we kind of got into was you're making your manufacturing network so complex that the smallest shock, which COVID was not a small shock, but shocks, all of a sudden, maybe you're having out of stocks or you're having issues meeting your orders because your manufacturing network has become too complex, sort of a thing. And so sometimes you need to really strip it down and say, what are really the key things? What are the big innovations that we want to go after? So you can't chase every small competitor that comes out and says, hey, we launched a keto creamer. Mm-hmm. And while I do like keto creamers, and I think that it is an interesting space, is that where we're going to get the most bang for our buck? And are we going to be able to scale that to, the masses? We need to sit down and say, where can we make our big bets? And let's focus our resources on that and make sure that we can, again, make it and make it every time and make it high quality every time too. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can't be following every single trend when it comes out. Hey, Fabricio, what do you make of this? Anything that you've seen work?
Well, first of all, I'm curious. I want to ask Luke a question. When you were mentioning that you're bringing various, products to the kitchen so that you guys are trying it out. Are we saying just, within the coffee space, or is this search that you guys are doing wider than just the coffee space? Because there are elements of these other things that you can see within this realm of opportunities within the kitchen that can bring you also insights to what you guys are doing. So I was very curious to understand if you're just looking at one specific space, or if this search and this curiosity that you guys are talking about is something wider.
That's a great question, and it's you're going to look at like coffee space for sure. I mean, that's where you kind of start, but we do always want to look cross category and outside of the category to see, the beauty space. I think is a really nice example of that. Of to pull storytelling themes. How are they connecting with their consumer? What kind of packaging, what kind of graphics, what kind of language are they using on their packs? And is that, something that we can kind of pull and use for some of our products? So yeah, it's not just coffee space. Obviously, we've got our eye on any new thing that comes out in coffee, but we're definitely looking outside of the coffee category it's inspiration building. It's not just within the coffee space. It's, what kind of storytelling techniques are they using, or maybe even ingredients that they're using that can help provide just a little bit of an aha and something that we can say, hey, our brands can utilize this, or our products can use this, that we really do go cross category for.
Thank you for giving us this inside look. I think that what's interesting when you're talking about storytelling is that this is also a way to connect to the consumer, because this is how we react to a brand or to whatever is offered to us. So I think that trying to understand the other storytelling that are out there and how they are built and how can we learn from them is very interesting. And just to finish around what you were asking, Paul, I think that it's really interesting to see how this sort of dynamic opposition, let's say, for lack of a better word, between large brands and challenger brands, if you can call them that, is very, very profitable for very interesting for the consumer, but also for the big brands there, because somehow they're pushed into new situations, and it's an extra stimuli for them to innovate and to really try to connect to the consumer. And I think that's really great.
Okay, so let's switch things over a little bit to the experience side of things. And although you've spoken about different focuses in industry, let's really focus on the coffee industry now. I'm quite excited to actually ask this question. We all know that drinking coffee is more than just an experience and more than just caffeine. It really is an experience for many enthusiasts. And I don't mind sharing myself. I'm one of those enthusiasts. How do you make sure that experience is on point for your products? How do you make sure that whole coffee experience really works for your customers? I'm really intrigued to hear what you have to say about this, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on that coffee is such a unique experience, and it's just not how it tastes. It's, your ritual in the morning. Why are you drinking it? It's a full 360 that we need to try to capture and gain some insights from. And so, we're going on site. One of my favorite things is to go inside a consumer's home, and we do some on-site interviews and really just start it out by saying, all right, make a cup of coffee and kind of walk us through what you're doing. And each experience is different from the last, and so that raises a lot of challenges, because when you're in a consumer packaged good industry, you're trying to make really consistent product over time. And so how do you say coffee creamer? How do you make sure that it's going to be the same for one person when there's someone else is using it in a totally different way? And that's kind of one of the bigger challenges we have when we're in the labs is, when you're doing, say, the scientific method, you're trying to have as many controls as possible, and you change one variable and you see, what that one variable kind of changes. In coffee, it's really hard. You've got what kind of beans are they using? What brew methods are they using? What temperature are they typically drinking their coffee at? These are all things that affect the flavor of coffee. What's the grind size? What type of water do they have? I mean, these are things that there's so many variables and you can't necessarily control with it. And so, when we're in the development process, there's a few things that we have to say, hey, these are our baselines. And we have to, when we're, say, evaluating new flavors, or we're evaluating how our whiteners, whiten the coffee, we do draw some lines in the sand and say, all right, this is how we're going to evaluate everything. So when we change, say, X variable, we're able to see how that adjusts. Then once you kind of start to narrow in on, okay, we think we're getting to a really good product here, what then you need to do is, all right, let's start introducing some of these variables. Let's see what it looks like if we're using a French press versus if we're just using your typical Mr. Coffee drip machine. Let's see what happens as the temperature goes from, say, 160, which is really, really hot coffee, which some people drink, down to, say, 120 or 100, which is kind of cold at that point. And how does that experience change? And let's make sure that we're not losing anything, from the full product experience. It's really, really complicated, but that's the really fun part when you're in the lab and you can do a lot of different variables and see how, your coffee product turns out.
It's almost like a religious experience for some people, coffee drinking. I can imagine that you have to be very careful not to kind of lose your audience by trying something that they regard as almost sacrilegious.
It's a really good call out there of most people's like initial cup of coffee. It is like a ritual. And if you screw up that coffee, you've screwed up their whole day at that point. And so, we chuckle about it somewhat in the labs of like, hey, we don't want to ruin people's day here. So let's make sure that we're going to do this right. Now, we're not doing life or death sort of things, but you don't want to screw up someone's day.
Fabricio, thinking more along the sort of company culture line and how best to get people to buy in, and we talked about this culture that we have with coffee, but how do we make sure that the customer experience is always there? Like, are there any tricks to the trade to achieving this? Is there any kind of magical formula to making sure that the customer experience is always there, or is that just really not realistic?
Well, I don't know. I don't think there's any magic formula there. It's just it's just work. It's getting to know who you're designing for. Especially when we're talking about experience, and Luke has mentioned this, is the fact that, well, you design for, when you design for the consumer experience, you have to understand who you're designing for, and then you try to craft elements so that each person can build its own experience around that. And I think that's the challenge. So there's no magic aspect to that. And so there's the fact that there's not only experience, but a multitude of personal experience that your product can trigger or be a part of. They can be the center of it. They can be, an accessory to this experience. So once again, is the key element is really try to understand your customer, try to, and Luke has mentioned this, also build consistency in what you're doing so that you as a consumer have some, some bearings that you can relate to when you're using that product. That's very important. And I wanted to ask Luke about this. Maybe he can tell us a little bit more on when we are talking about coffee experience. What are the musts that you must include when you're talking about building this experience for your coffee drinkers? What are some elements that cannot be left out of this? That's my first question. And the second question is that are you guys trying to move into the other aspects of this experience? Because you're doing the coffee cream, but maybe there are other things that you guys can sort of use to help build the brand, or maybe some resources online, some tasting that you guys are doing. I find this experience area very fascinating and very difficult to sort of master. So that's why I wanted to have his look on that.
Yeah, that's a good insight, that there's a few key things that you don't want to screw up when you're doing with someone's coffee. But really, and that's kind of the key when you think about it, is, when someone's making a cup of coffee, there's, the aroma aspect of it. It's really kind of like waking somebody up. So that's always a key piece that we're trying to keep in mind is, they've got their coffee beans and there's some sort of aroma when it's brewing. And so it's really bringing this sort of thing. Well, when now you've got, say, a flavored coffee creamer or a French vanilla creamer, you want to make sure that you're getting a nice sweet vanilla aroma. So when you're designing a product, you want to make sure that kind of pops. You don't want to leave that out. And then, people, when they're creaming their coffee, they're usually going to some sort of whiteness or some sort of level that they say, like, yeah, this is my cup of coffee here. It's this color. I think maybe you've seen on Instagram or something, there's like a funny grid and it's like black coffee's in one corner and then it's like the whitest coffee you've ever seen. It's probably just coffee creamer on the other, and it's like, hey, which one are you? I think people are like, yeah, I'm a B5, so it's like when they're creaming their coffee, you want to make sure that you're not doing anything funky with the product that's going to screw up that whitening experience. And so those are a couple of key things. There's, multiple other things that we want to make sure we're not screwing up the flavor. Are you not creating any bitterness and those sorts of things? But, there's a couple key points around, say, aroma and whitening and flavor that you got to make sure are on point, because that's what the consumer is really looking for when they're going after that morning cup of coffee.
When you're talking about that scale, I guess at some point it's not even coffee anymore if you're not careful.
Yeah, I think the Beastie Boys said, I like my sugar with coffee and cream or something like that. So
a nice reference. When I've looked at your CV, it looks like you've been doing a lot of work with plant-based ingredients. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that and maybe how that's come into your current role?
Yeah, I think, I did most of my bench level, product development experience was all around the Silk brand. So like I had mentioned before, soy milk, almond milk, coconut milk, all the big, any sort of milk you could think of alternative. And really now as I go into, the coffee space, we're looking at ready to drink coffees, but we also do the coffee creamers. And a big growing segment that we've really capitalized on over the last couple of years is, again, in that macro trend of plant-based and more people going into flexitarian sort of lifestyle. And so, the Silk brand has launched, an almond creamer, a coconut creamer, and now even oat creamers are kind of the newest kid on the block. And so I've been able to, leverage the experience again of really, you're thinking of consumer-centric design. Again, at the end of the day, what is that consumer, your target consumer looking for? And so what kind of ingredients from a plant-based perspective can we select for that? A good example is we launched about a year and a half ago, a Silk half and half alternative. So it's supposed to just act like your dairy half and half, Land O'Lakes half and half that you would say use today. But when you were looking at that experience, you're saying, okay, people are looking at half and half for whitening and to build body within their coffee and then to reduce some of the bitterness. So when you're looking at a plant-based product, all right, what ingredients can we select that are going to go after that? And so, we settled on, hey, let's do an oat blend with a coconut blend. And so you've got these, oat that provides some body, some thickness. It's also got a very neutral taste so that, you're not overpowering or covering up the coffee flavor that, a half and half consumer is looking for. But then now you're layering in some coconut, which gives you some really nice whiteness. It gives you really nice fatty mouthfeel that can help provide even more body and mouthfeel in your a cup of coffee. And so really designing both of those things together to get to, again, what is that consumer looking for at the end of the day? And I think we kind of nailed it on that one.
I'm kind of thinking to myself as you're saying that you must have had an experience along the line where you've tried something that's been absolutely awful. It's
a really good point. Of one of the benefits of being a food scientist and being in the product development industry is you can eat anything that you make for the most part. Now, if you say you're fermenting yogurt and you do too much fermentation, that's not necessarily a good thing. Now you've got the most sour yogurt on the planet. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a little bit of element of guess and check in there. And sometimes you make something that's totally not there. But that's kind of the beauty of it. You can take one sip of it and say, yep, this wasn't it. Back to the drawing board.
Fabricio, the consumer is demanding that businesses do things more ethically and in the right way. And that kind of leads into what we're talking about with using products the right way, treating the environment the right way. How do we as consumers and companies ensure that we're doing things correctly?
Wow, that's a good and tough question to answer. Well, we are seeing a lot of talk about ESG or corporate sustainability and other evidences that there is a major shift in corporate activity and that's already in motion, right? And we've talked about that here today because this is a consumer push thing that we are being driven towards. So I think we are going through a huge transition, as I said before, where let's say old ways of doing things are dying and the new ones are still an uncertainty. So that's the big challenge because we're just in between them. And this is where the big players and the smaller players, whether you're a big brand or a challenger brand or whatever, you have to operate today. So, and again, this is the result of the drivers that we were talking about. So I think to keep it simple, it's about being really transparent, but not only by saying it, but by the actions that you guys are that someone is having, and open to change because it's there and it's inevitable, and willing to drive purpose for your stakeholders, for your customer, and I think more broadly, have a positive impact on society, on the planet, and whatever. And so I'm not sure what the right way is, but there are first steps in that direction that companies should already be taking. Because if they're not already taking this, well, eventually, if they don't do it, they will fall behind. And I think that most, big players have done it. And I know that, for instance, Danone here in France has pledged to be what they call an entreprise à mission, which is someone that put that into its own, it's more than just a vision, it's within his social contract of the business. So to say that we are here to do good, you guys are B Corp. So I know that the US was I think was the first part of the Danone that went as a B corporation. So these are the steps that you have to take to show the world that you are willing to walk into that direction, and more importantly, that you're willing to walk the talk, as they say. So I think that those are the things that we should start doing. The rest, it's going to come next.
Did you want to follow up on that, Luke?
Yeah, I think he touched on a really good thing of big players and small players. I think one of the really nice things of, say, Danone, we're a multinational corporation, so we operate in many different countries across the globe, many different geographies. What that provides is a really, really large scope. So to Fabricio's point of, we in North America, we're B Corp certified, and we were the largest company that was able to achieve that. I think we've lost that at some point, but we've pushed other companies, then other even larger companies, to say, like, yes, this is something that we should even continue to go after. And so we can actually affect a really large change. And, if we start pushing and saying non-GMO, for example, we want more non-GMO ingredients, 10 years ago, ingredient suppliers are saying that's just not something that we do. But then as a big player like us says, hey, this is something that we're going to say, again, we're putting a stake in the ground, and, all of our silk products are going to be non-GMO project verified. Then now all ingredient suppliers are starting to look at their supply chains, and they're starting to clean up their supply chains. And so, as a small player, you can start doing some of these things, and you can have a really good story to tell, but you sometimes need these big players to really move the market if you want to start to, affect change.
Perfect. I guess the last question for today, and maybe we'll leave it after this one, is to kind of reflect on what you need to do at Danone to make sure going forward you stay in the position that you have and you continue to be a player within the coffee industry. What are those kind of like key details that you have to focus on?
Yeah, I think, one of the things I want me and what I really, push down to the team is, let's keep the inspiration alive. And so, we had talked about earlier in the conversation, getting in products from market, doing sessions in the lab, those are one of the key pieces I think that keeps our innovation machine kind of humming is, hey, let's keep feeding it new inspiration activities. So let's continue to do those team tastings. Let's go do coffee crawls. One of the fun things of being in the coffee space is, hey, we can go out to coffee shops, and this is part of our work. You're going to go hang out. You're going to go see what's on the new menus. You're going to go taste what is kind of at the forefront there. And so let's keep doing those activities, even in this sort of hybrid and remote sort of environment. How can we continue to build and create space so that the team can have time to think or the inspiration to kind of think of what's going to be next in the future of food?
Thank you. Fabricio, anything you'd like to add before we close up?
No, I think we pretty much rounded it. I want to thank Luke for the opportunity. This talk around coffee is fascinating. I might even give coffee a second chance. I don't know. I'm going to think about it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you guys for having me on. It was a great conversation. And Fabricio, if you're going to start with coffee, just get a nice Chemex, you grind it medium, 2 minutes, and you'll be good.
So there you have it. A big thank you to our panel, to Luke and Fabricio. I think you will agree, viewer, they have both left us with plenty to ponder on. But if you're looking for a little bit more on some of the new exciting trends and experiences coming our way in 2022, why not grab yourself a copy of our 2022 Innovation Trends Report? It has a little something for everyone, touching on UX, ESG, and especially what the future might hold for businesses. And you can find a link for that very report in the description of this podcast on all your favorite suppliers. As mentioned, we're available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. So that just about does it for now. So join us next time for more exciting guests on more exciting topics. This is Paul C. Duarte signing off for Tech Innovation Talks, powered by MJV. Take care and keep innovating.